It was already past midnight when I got home. My hands were stiff from the cold and the cheap hospital gloves. My shoulders sore from leaning over an elderly patient for nearly an hour to help her breathe. I work long shifts in the ER, and that night, like most, I had skipped lunch and ran on burnt coffee and adrenaline. Still, as I stepped through the door of our small apartment, I felt that tiny flicker of warmth in my chest, because Christmas was coming. The lights I'd hung last week still blinked softly across the living room wall. They weren't much, just a $10 set from a corner store, but they gave the room a heartbeat. My tired eyes drifted to the bag by the front door. It was packed already. I'd wrapped the gifts the night before, neatly, with gold ribbon like Patricia always liked. There was a red wine bottle too, and a large container of spiced rice, the kind they all raved about every year, but somehow never seemed to remember I made. They always assumed it came from some catering service. I never corrected them. I had just slipped out of my shoes when my phone rang. I didn't even check the screen. I knew the voice on the other end before it said a word. Harper, my wife's younger sister. Always well-groomed, always poised, always dripping in curated charm. She was the kind of person who said, "darling," with a straight face and could spend 30 minutes describing the aesthetic of a butter knife. "Hi," she said, her voice syrupy. "I just wanted to check in before tomorrow." I thought she was going to ask me to pick up something last minute for the party, maybe gingerbread cookies or a spare tablecloth. I braced myself for it. But instead, she said, gently, "Don't come for Christmas." Just like that. At first, I thought she was joking. "Sorry." She hesitated, then repeated it, softer this time. "Don't come. It's just, we're trying to make a certain impression this year." Still standing by the doorway, I didn't know how to respond. I blinked at the blinking lights, suddenly too bright. "Impression? You know, Grayson will be there. My boyfriend. I've mentioned him. Right. The billionaire. The tech investor who made his first million at 19 and now bought wine that cost more than my rent." I remembered. "We just want things to feel elevated," she added, like I was some scratch on a polished surface. I didn't say anything. There was nothing to say that wouldn't come out raw. But then another voice came through the speaker. "Patricia, my mother-in-law." She didn't even wait for introductions. "We'll just pretend we don't know you if you show up," she said plainly, like she was reading a grocery list. I heard Harper gasp slightly, maybe caught off guard by how blunt her mother had been. But no one corrected her. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear. "So you're saying I'm not invited?" There was a pause. Then Harper said, "It's just one dinner. Maybe next year." I didn't respond. I ended the call and stood there in silence. The room was too quiet, too hollow, like the sound had been sucked out. I walked over to the tree, barely 5 feet tall and missing half the ornaments, but it was ours. I looked at the bag again. The gifts, the wine, the rice. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something crack under my ribs. Not anger, not sadness, just emptiness. I sat down slowly on the couch and stared at the lights. Red, blue, green, yellow, each one blinking like a heartbeat I no longer felt. What struck me wasn't the exclusion. I've never been the favorite. I've been called too quiet, too boring, just a nurse, even though I'd worked 3 jobs to put my wife through law school. What struck me was how easy it was for them to cut me out. How comfortable they were pretending I didn't belong. I remember a time, years ago, when Patricia cried to me on the phone because their mortgage was 2 months behind. I dipped into my savings and covered it without hesitation. Harper? She'd totaled her car in college, and I was the only one who co-signed for her new one when her credit was tanked. These people knew I would show up. I always did. Until now. The spiced rice started to feel cold in its container. I hadn't even taken off my coat yet. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, letting the silence settle in. In that moment, I realized something. This wasn't about the billionaire. It wasn't even about Christmas. It was about control. They never saw me as part of them. I was convenient. A placeholder. A man-shaped coat rack. I didn't match their world, so they decided to edit me out. But here's the thing about quiet men. We don't make a scene. We just wait. We let the silence do the talking. And sometimes, silence is the loudest sound in the room. I reached over, turned off the blinking lights, and let the darkness settle. That night, I didn't go online. Didn't call anyone. Didn't explain. I didn't even tell my wife, who was already staying with them to help prep for the holiday. Let them have their performance. Let them polish the silverware and rehearse their accents. Let them tell their stories to a man with $1 billion. Because me? I had something they didn't know how to measure. Value that didn't need to be seen to be real. And they were about to find out what it meant to erase the man who held everything together, not by rage, not by revenge, but by simply walking away. That was the night I decided I wouldn't fight for a seat at their table. I'd build my own, and leave theirs, perfectly empty. There's something oddly freeing about being unwanted. It's not instant. It creeps in, like the cold when you stand outside too long. First, you feel nothing. Then you start to shiver. Eventually, you realize your body is gone numb, and you just stop caring. That's what the morning felt like after that call. I didn't call my wife. I didn't ask for explanations. I didn't send angry texts or question how her family, people I'd helped, fed, carried, could be so dismissive. I already knew the answer. It was never about who I was. It was about who I wasn't. I wasn't rich. I wasn't charming in that dinner party kind of way. I didn't wear cologne with unpronounceable names or network with venture capitalists. I worked long nights in a trauma ward. I came home smelling like antiseptic. My back hurt. My hands were calloused. I was real. And real didn't fit their fantasy. They wanted polish. A curated aesthetic. And I was too textured. I sat on the edge of the bed that morning and looked around at the apartment I'd worked so hard to build with her. The same apartment where her family had celebrated birthdays and baby showers, wine nights and New Year's toasts. They took photos here, laughed here, ate meals cooked by my hands in the kitchen she never used. I paid most of the rent. They never noticed. That was the thing about her family, they never noticed. When Harper couldn't get approved for her car, I didn't hesitate. I signed the forms, paid the fees, and even covered her first 3 insurance payments. She called me a lifesaver back then. But lifesavers get used and tossed once the boat is steady again. And when Patricia called me crying about the house, her voice shaking, her pride barely intact, I didn't even flinch. I drove across the city in the pouring rain, walked into that bank with soaked shoes, and negotiated with the manager for a deferment. Then I wired them $12,000 the next morning. That payment kept them afloat. That payment kept their Christmas lights on. The same ones I wouldn't get to see this year. Funny how that works. They remembered the wine I brought, but never who brought it. They remembered the rice dish, but never who cooked it. They remembered the warmth, the help, the presence, but never the person. But I remembered everything. I remembered how Patricia once told her friend at brunch, he's sweet, simple, very steady, like I was a table leg, functional, not worth admiration, just there to keep things from falling. I remembered the way Harper would lean into my wife and whisper about how I still wore the same black coat from last year, as if owning the same winter coat 2 years in a row was a crime. I remembered when her father once called me noble in a tragic kind of way, like I was a stray dog he might pity but never adopt. All those comments I let slide. All the disrespect I folded into quiet smiles. Because I believed family meant overlooking flaws. I believed love could make you patient. And I believed that, over time, people would see the truth behind the quiet man. But I was wrong. Some people don't see you because they don't want to. You don't fit the picture they painted, so they crop you out like background noise. I stood up, walked to my desk, and pulled out the old black folder I kept tucked behind some medical journals. Inside it were documents, lots of them. Bank records, wire transfers, co-signed agreements, ownership papers. You see, while they were busy ignoring me, they forgot I was the one who handled the back end. Patricia's house, that mortgage they saved face on. I was listed on the emergency relief fund that was linked to her name. The bank had my contact details, not hers. Harper's boutique, that angel investor she boasted about at her last launch party, that was me. I created an alias, B. Trenton Investments, just to keep her pride intact. Her store lease was in my name. Their family savings account, that emergency pot they liked to brag about in case of a rainy day, that fund had been steadily growing under my management for 4 years. I was the sole manager. They never asked. I never offered. But the truth was, they didn't want to know. They just liked the idea that good things magically appeared when they snapped their fingers. And for a long time, I let them live that illusion. Maybe because I thought being useful was enough. But being useful isn't the same as being valued. That morning, I brewed myself a cup of coffee and watched the sun rise through the window. I didn't feel rage. I didn't feel sorrow. I felt clarity. They didn't want me? Fine. Then they didn't get the version of me that held them up anymore. I logged into the bank account first. The emergency fund, frozen. The boutique's rent payments, canceled. Let Harper deal with the landlord for once. Then the house note, Patricia's precious retirement nest. I removed my secondary authorization. Let her field the next bank call. I didn't leave a note. I didn't send a text. I didn't even log out of the system. I just stopped. Stopped carrying them. Stopped lifting them. Stopped being the backbone they pretended didn't exist. And it felt good. Not out of spite, but out of balance. They had spent years shaping an image, playing house with luxury, and pretending it was all organic, homegrown success. But underneath the surface, it was me holding up the foundation. Me, the man they never wanted. They thought I was quiet because I was weak. But I was quiet because I was calculating. Because when quiet men move, the world doesn't notice until it falls. That day, I went for a walk. No phone, no destination. Just air in my lungs and freedom in my steps. I watched children play in the snow, couples rushing with gifts, strangers helping each other carry boxes to cars. It all felt honest. And I realized, with every step I took away from that world they created, I was getting closer to something more real, more mine. They didn't want me at Christmas? Then they wouldn't get the man who paid for the candles, the food, the heat, and the peace. Let them perform. Let them sparkle. I'd given them a stage for years. Now I was taking the lights with me. The silence didn't echo, it settled. Like snow on rooftops, thick and final. And for the first time in years, I wasn't bracing for Patricia's sharp remarks at the dinner table or Harper's side eyes when I passed the wine. I wasn't preparing my face to smile through another cold joke or filtering my words to avoid being called too intense. I wasn't shrinking. I was, still, present, just for myself. The house was quiet, but my mind wasn't. It buzzed, not with anger, but decisions. Clean, cold, deliberate ones. I sat at the kitchen table, coffee steaming beside me, a yellow legal pad open in front of me. I began making a list. Not of people, not of names. Just actions, quiet exits, calculated departures. Every line I wrote was a string I'd been holding that now needed letting go. Mortgage top-up, canceled. It was the first thing I did. Patricia's home, the big white one with the stone pillars she always bragged about, was kept afloat by two things, her loud pride and my quiet monthly deposits. They thought it was their own frugality. No, it was me. Every time she found an extra $1,000, it was because I had silently deposited it into the joint account I opened in their name under a small LLC, Cypress Renewal. Sounds like a spa brand, right? They never asked what it was. Never cared to know. So I quietly ended it. Family emergency account. Locked. They never once thanked me for it, but they sure loved bragging about it. My wife used to call it our legacy fund whenever guests were around. The reality? I opened it when Patricia's health started to decline and no one else wanted to think long-term. I built it up slowly, redirecting part of my night shift bonuses, never touching it, not even once. That morning, I logged into the platform, changed the email access, and locked withdrawals behind two-factor authentication. No warning. No explanation. Just done. Harper's Boutique's angel investor exited. That one stung a little. Not because I wanted credit, but because I believed in her. When she stood in my living room 3 years ago, crying about her failed Kickstarter campaign, I didn't hesitate. I created a shell investment firm, backed it with my savings, and sent the wire transfer under the name Brinfield Holdings. It was enough to get her out of debt and open the boutique in Midtown. Everyone praised her. Harper's so resilient. She's a genius. Not once did she mention who helped. When I ended that funding, I didn't tell her. I just instructed the firm's proxy to decline the next round. Then I called the leasing office, told them Brinfield Holdings would no longer be guaranteeing her rent. That was all. No rage. No bitterness. Because when a tree withdraws its roots, it doesn't scream. It just stops growing. And the leaves fall. I didn't unfollow anyone. I didn't delete photos or block numbers. I just became invisible, quiet, in a way they'd never noticed before. Only this time, it wasn't submission. It was subtraction. Every relationship is a system. And for years, I was the invisible backbone, never flashy, never loud, but always there. Holding, balancing, absorbing tension. I didn't ask to be thanked. I didn't want applause. I just wanted respect. But when Harper said, "Don't come for Christmas," and Patricia threatened to pretend I didn't exist, well, I simply gave them what they asked for. My absence. And absence, when it's the thing holding the beams together, isn't silence. It's collapse. I remember walking to the window that afternoon, looking down at the snow-covered sidewalk below. A young boy was helping his little sister make snow angels on the edge of the pavement. They giggled, their jackets puffed out like little balloons. And I wondered, just for a second, what kind of man I might have been if I hadn't been pulled into the orbit of people who only valued shine. What kind of peace I could have had if I hadn't spent the last decade earning the approval of people who thought approval was a currency. I closed the curtain, poured another cup of coffee, and then I did something I hadn't done in years. I made a new budget. For me. No hidden accounts for emergencies they'd never thank me for. No side funds to save someone else's pride. Just one account. One card. One man. Then I made a phone call. "Andre," I said, when the young voice answered. "You still looking for a second internship?" It took him a second to place me. "Mr. R." "Yeah. Oh man, I didn't think you'd call. I sent that message months ago. I've got something for you," I said. "It's not glamorous. It's hands-on. But it's real. And you'll learn." He hesitated. "You sure?" "I'm very sure." Because Andre? He was different. He was hungry, humble, and kind. I had met him 2 years ago through a mentoring program. Quiet kid, always carrying an old laptop and fixing things he couldn't afford to replace. He reminded me of me. That call wasn't just about an internship. It was about investment into someone who'd never erase me when things got good. After the call, I leaned back and took a breath. The apartment felt warmer. Not because anything had changed physically, but because something had shifted inside me. A detachment. A letting go of the people who treated me like scaffolding and expected me to disappear once the building looked pretty. Let them keep their polished lies. Let them toast champagne with Grayson and pretend their lives weren't built on the quiet strength of the man they threw away. I didn't need them to know. I just needed me to remember. And I would. Because every gift I'd ever given them, every dollar, every sacrifice, every moment of peace bought with my silence, they would miss it. Not immediately. Not today. But when the pipes froze. When the boutique's landlord came knocking. When Patricia's insurance bounced. When the cracks began to show behind their curated smiles. They'd look around and realize the one man they erased was the one keeping them from falling apart. I didn't expect the quiet to feel this good. Christmas Eve rolled in like a storm wrapped in velvet, quiet, cold, and slow. I stayed in bed later than usual, not because I was tired, but because I could. No obligations. No expectations. No in-laws peeking into the oven or Harper fake smiling while complaining about the centerpiece. It was the first time in years that I wasn't running around trying to make other people's holiday feel whole. I made coffee, black, strong, and let it fill the room with the smell of something real. No cinnamon candles. No expensive scented diffusers. Just coffee and silence. My phone had been silent for 2 days. No text from my wife. No updates from Harper. Not even a sarcastic Merry Christmas from Patricia. They were preparing, no doubt. Prepping for the evening like it was a Broadway show. Harper had been planning this night for weeks. She called it the big reveal the moment she would introduce Grayson Ellison to the family. The billionaire tech mogul. The man who could put her name next to magazine headlines and six-figure wedding fantasies. They wanted everything perfect. Spotless. Patricia probably had her pearls on before breakfast. Harper would have had her makeup artist arrive by noon. I could picture it clearly. Candles lit just right, fireplace roaring even though the heating worked perfectly, violinist by the archway. They'd hired a jazz quartet. I knew because I'd helped them once with the deposit on that quartet, back when it was for someone else's wedding that ended in 3 months. But this year, no one needed me. Or rather, they didn't want me. And so I stayed home. I didn't even turn on the tree lights. They hadn't called to ask why I wasn't coming, which told me they didn't think I'd say no. They believed I'd beg, that I'd press and plead and ask to be let back in, that maybe I'd send a gift anyway, or drop off something sweet for the table, just to show I was still the good guy. But they didn't understand the kind of man I am. I don't need to shout. I just need to stop. And stopping is what I did. I walked past the blinking gifts I had wrapped weeks ago. Still there. Still untouched. A quiet graveyard of effort wasted on people who never said thank you. I didn't scroll through social media, though I knew the posts would be coming in. Harper had likely hired a photographer to capture the evening. She once told me that Christmas wasn't about memories, it was about content. She meant it. Perfect angles. Perfect filters. They didn't just want to impress Grayson, they wanted to curate him. And I didn't fit into the feed. I was too ordinary. Too useful in ways that didn't photograph well. No one posts about the man who fixes the boiler at midnight. The one who pays the light bill quietly or drives you to the airport at 5 a.m. when your ride cancels. I wasn't sleek. I wasn't exciting. I wasn't an aesthetic. I was a foundation. And foundations aren't supposed to be seen. But I was fine with that now. That evening, as the sky turned to indigo and the chill crept through the windows, I cooked a simple dinner for myself. Nothing fancy. Just what I liked. I didn't think once about whether it was enough for someone else. I poured myself a glass of wine. The same one I'd brought for their party. A bottle Patricia once scoffed at for being underwhelming. She liked wine that came with French names and gold foil. Me? I liked wine that tasted like patience. And as I took the first sip, I imagined the performance starting. I could see them in my mind, Harper at the entrance, dressed in something expensive and understated, pretending to be surprised each time a guest complimented her. Patricia offering her signature sugar cookies, the one she bought but always claimed she baked. The fireplace roaring. The lights dimmed to a golden hue. Grayson would arrive last, of course. That's how they timed it. Big entrance. Big moment. They would swarm him. Shake hands. Compliment his shoes. Talk about stocks they didn't understand and brands they couldn't afford. My wife would probably be standing near the piano, pretending to enjoy the music while glancing sideways to check Harper's approval. It was all a performance. And I used to be part of it. Unpaid crew backstage, working lights and lifting scenes while they took their bows. This year, they decided I wasn't needed. So I didn't show up. And somehow, that made me feel bigger, not smaller. I was done being their silent supporting actor. Let them have their spotlight. Let them glitter and glow. But without the man who used to iron their tablecloths at midnight. Without the man who quietly paid the caterer when the card got declined. Without the man who refilled the wine glasses while everyone else told stories they didn't live. They had erased me. Now they would perform without the glue that held their act together. And something deep down told me they'd feel it. Maybe not tonight. Maybe not when the cameras were clicking and the flutes were full. But eventually, when the bills came, when the smiles faded, when the real work had to be done and no one remembered how to lift the weight I always carried. I didn't text my wife. Didn't ask how the evening went. Didn't care if they missed me. Because for the first time, I had no need to be part of something that cost me my peace. I sat back in my chair and looked at the small tree in the corner. Still bare. Still standing. And I smiled. Let the performance begin. Because when the curtains fall, they'll know who was missing. The day after Christmas, the world outside was still wrapped in white. Snow clung to the rooftops, and the streets wore a silence that only winter could deliver. No carols, no laughter, just stillness. It matched my mood perfectly. I hadn't checked my phone since Christmas Eve. Whatever performances they'd staged, I didn't care to watch. My peace, though quiet, was enough. But sometime around noon, my phone buzzed. Once. Then again. A third time. At first, I ignored it. I was halfway through organizing old books, ones I'd promised myself I'd reread when life slowed down. And now it had. But the name that lit up the screen when I finally glanced at it stopped me mid-page. Grayson Ellison. I stared at the name for a full minute, unsure if I was seeing it right. We'd never spoken directly before. He was Harper's prized boyfriend, the one they'd polished the house for, adjusted their personalities for. The man they chose over me. The voicemail icon blinked. I played it. His voice came through, calm but with something beneath it. Thoughtfulness, maybe. Or realization. Hey, man. I know this is unexpected. I didn't get your number from Harper. Andre gave it to me. Said you were his mentor. That alone hit me like a slow breath in cold air. Andre. The quiet kid with the second-hand laptop I'd helped get into a summer tech program. I didn't know they were connected. Grayson continued. I saw your photo at the party. In the hallway. Family portrait stuff. I recognized you instantly. You're the guy who mentored my little cousin through that Harlem program, right? The one who paid his tuition and never took credit. I sat down slowly. My knees felt unsteady. He knew. Yeah, he said, you're that guy. The one who didn't make a scene. Who showed up when it mattered. Who stayed invisible while everyone else soaked up the light. His voice paused, like he was still processing it. So imagine my surprise, he went on, when I heard Harper and Patricia joking about you. Calling you deadweight. A charity case in a suit. Laughing. In front of me. A chill crawled over my skin. Not because it hurt, but because it didn't. Not anymore. The cruelty wasn't new. The audience was. Grayson's tone hardened just slightly. I left the party. A breath passed through the recording, then a final note. I left her. I don't tolerate cruelty wrapped in Christmas bows. Click. That was it. That was the whole message. Barely a minute long. But it changed everything. I sat there for a while, staring at the phone like it might say more. Like maybe another message would come through with some alternate ending. But there was nothing else. Just the raw truth of what had happened. I got up and walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, then leaned against the counter as the weight of it all began to settle. He'd seen a photo. Of me. Of all the things they tried to hide, erase, and rewrite, what shattered their illusion wasn't some dramatic confrontation or viral post. It was a photo. I remembered that photo clearly. It wasn't posed. Just a candid shot from 3 years ago. We were in my backyard, celebrating my wife's graduation. I had grilled for 6 hours while everyone else drank mimosas and took photos. At one point, my niece had grabbed my phone and snapped a picture of me handing a plate to Patricia, laughing about something small and silly. My arm was around Harper's shoulder. Everyone looked happy. It had somehow ended up framed in the hallway at Patricia's house, probably out of convenience or because the lighting looked good. They never thought twice about it. Never considered that the man in the corner of their curated wall might one day cost them their perfect show. And yet, that's exactly what happened. The man they pretended not to know turned out to be the reason their guest of honor walked out the door. I didn't feel triumph. No smug smile crept across my face. What I felt was something deeper, like justice without sound, like a weight finally sliding off my shoulders. They tried to shine by dimming me, but you can't hide a steady light, not forever, not when it's real. I sat back down and opened my email, not to write anything, just to stare at the inbox. I knew what would come next. The scrambling, the justifications, the damage control. And sure enough, by evening, the first message came. From Patricia. Subject line, let's talk. No greeting. No apology. Just a line. I think there's been a misunderstanding. Harper is devastated. Can you help us fix this with Grayson? He respects you. He listens to you. I didn't respond. Not because I didn't have words, but because silence, I've learned, makes people reflect harder than any reply. An hour later, Harper messaged. This time, it was longer. I know things have been weird, and I'm sorry if we made you feel left out. That wasn't the intention. Can we please talk? I think you could help clarify some things with Grayson. Clarify? They wanted me to translate my worth. As if now that it mattered to someone important, it needed to be defined. I put my phone down. I didn't need to respond. My photo had already spoken for me. That night, I lit the tree. Not for Christmas, but for myself. The lights flickered gently, casting soft colors across the walls. I sat beneath it, glass of wine in hand, and felt more peace than I'd known in years. Because sometimes, you don't need to raise your voice to be heard. You just need to let the truth sit in a frame long enough for the right person to see it. They tried to erase me. But they forgot. Real character leaves shadows. And shadows show up in photographs. It started with a knock. Not loud. Not urgent. But persistent. The kind of knock that's too rehearsed to sound casual. I was at my desk, organizing some invoices for a clinic in Queens, sipping lukewarm coffee, when I heard it. A slow rhythm. 3 short taps, followed by silence. I didn't need to check the peephole to know who it was. I already felt the shift in the air. I opened the door. There she was. Patricia. Wearing oversized sunglasses even though it was cloudy, clutching a handbag so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Behind her, a black car idled at the curb, engine humming like it was impatient too. And in the front seat, Harper. Looking anywhere but at me. Her face was pale, but her posture screamed tension, arms folded, eyes locked on a street lamp like it had answers. Patricia tried to smile. It was the kind of smile people give when they're about to ask for something they don't think they deserve. May we come in? She asked, her voice strained and brittle. I didn't move. I didn't answer. I just stood in the doorway, waiting. She cleared her throat. This isn't easy to say, but we need to talk. About Grayson. Of course they did. Now I was useful again. I didn't reply. Just raised an eyebrow and waited. Patricia took off her sunglasses, revealing eyes puffy from what I assumed were either tears or a sleepless night. Harper hasn't slept since Christmas, she said. Grayson blocked her number. Won't return her calls. And her reputation. I said nothing. Because what do you say to people who ignored your presence until it became inconvenient? She continued, as if talking faster would fill the silence I kept giving her. You know he respects you, she said, a little too eagerly now. He mentioned how highly he thinks of you. How you've mentored Andre. How generous you've been. We, Harper especially, had no idea how close you were. I tilted my head slightly. Close? I finally said. Her lips faltered. Well, not close, maybe. But he clearly values you. There it was. Values you. Suddenly, I mattered again. Not because I was family. Not because I was a human being. But because he valued me. And now they were scrambling to borrow that value like a flashlight during a blackout. She stepped closer. If you could just talk to him. Explain that what he overheard was a misunderstanding. We didn't mean any harm. It was a joke. A bad one. She gave a little laugh, sharp and nervous. The kind people make when they're trying to convince themselves, too. Behind her, Harper finally opened the car door. She stepped out slowly, clutching her coat tight around her. For a moment, she didn't speak. Then, in the smallest voice I'd ever heard her use, she said, "We messed up." I looked at her. Really looked. And for the first time, I didn't see the confident woman who used to strut through the house with expensive perfume trailing behind her. I didn't see the smug sister-in-law who once told a family friend I was just a floor nurse, as if that disqualified me from love. I saw someone afraid. Not of me, but of the collapse. Of the illusion they'd built for themselves now catching fire. Patricia kept pushing. Grayson is high profile. People follow his lead. He made one vague post online, and now Harper's lost 2 endorsements. One of her distributors backed out. We need this fixed. There was that word again. They didn't come to apologize. They came to clean up. I exhaled slowly. You called me dead weight, I said quietly. Harper flinched. You said I was a charity case in a suit. Patricia opened her mouth, but I held up a hand. You didn't expect the man in the photo to matter. You didn't even remember the photo was there. Silence. Just the engine humming in the background and the faint sound of wind brushing the trees. Patricia stepped forward again. You've always been good at calming people down. Maybe if you could talk to Grayson, just once, he'd see that we didn't mean anything by it. I leaned against the doorframe, arms folded. They didn't get it. They still thought this was about a fix, a patch, a reset. But this wasn't something that could be undone. This wasn't about a single moment. It was about years. Years of being overlooked. Years of showing up, giving quietly, and being made to feel like a shadow at their table. And now they were here, begging for the light they'd once tried to dim. You're not here because you're sorry, I said. You're here because the mask cracked. Patricia's face tightened. Harper stepped forward. I am sorry, she said, voice breaking. I wasn't thinking. We were stupid. We were cruel. But Grayson is everything to me. And you're the reason he walked away. I nodded slowly. For once, the truth felt clean. You're right, I said. I am. She stared at me, like she didn't know what to do with that honesty. So you'll talk to him? Patricia asked, hopeful again. I smiled. Not cruelly. Not smugly. Just peacefully. No, I said. And I stepped back. Then closed the door. Gently. Deliberately. Behind it, the quiet returned. I leaned against it for a second, listening to the stunned silence outside. I could imagine Patricia blinking, Harper frozen mid-step, trying to decide whether to knock again or just walk away. They didn't knock. After a few seconds, I heard the car door close. Then the engine faded down the street. Gone. I walked back to the kitchen, sat down, picked up my mug again. Still warm. I took a sip and smiled to myself. This was what accountability looked like, not shouted in arguments or posted online, but felt in the echo after silence. They'd never heard it before. Never learned how powerful stillness could be when it carried truth. And now, they were learning. Not through fury. Not through revenge. But through absence. I didn't need to lift a hand to destroy them. All I had to do was stop helping them hold up the lie. And now? Now the cracks were showing. I didn't check social media often, but something told me to open the app that morning. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was curiosity. Or maybe it was just the quiet thrill of wondering what happens when people realize the mask they wore so proudly is beginning to slip. The first thing I saw was a post. It wasn't from Harper. It wasn't from Patricia. It was from Grayson. Just a single sentence. No tags, no images, no names. Watch how people treat the ones they think can't give them anything. It tells you everything. That was it. Simple. Elegant. Devastating. No one was mentioned. But everyone in their orbit knew who it was about. Harper's comment section turned off by noon. One of her old sponsors, a luxury home decor brand, issued a vague statement about reevaluating partnerships in light of recent values misalignment. Her boutique's Instagram went from 3 posts a day to total silence. The ripple had begun, and I didn't lift a finger. Grayson didn't say my name. He didn't need to. He just told the truth, his truth. What he saw, what he heard. And the truth had a way of echoing in rooms people thought were soundproof. That single sentence hit harder than any public fallout they feared. Because it didn't attack, it revealed. And nothing scares people more than being seen without their performance. Later that day, I got a message from Andre. Yo, you see Grayson's post? I think he's talking about what happened at the party. People are going wild in the comments. I smiled and typed back. He said what needed to be said. You good. Never better. Because the truth is, I wasn't shaken. I wasn't even surprised. I was still. Solid. Like a tree whose roots had finally stopped feeding ungrateful branches. I went back to my routine that week. Brewed my coffee. Finished the clinic invoices. Walked to the park one afternoon just to feel the winter sun on my face. Life didn't feel heavy anymore. Not because it got easier, but because I had stopped carrying what wasn't mine to hold. That Friday, I got a call from a colleague at the hospital. Hey, she said, trying to sound casual. You might want to know. Harper's father called HR. I paused. He called HR? Why? He said he was concerned about your mental health. Something about emotional instability and asking if we'd noticed any erratic behavior. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. Of course, when they can't control the story, they try to rewrite the ending. My voice was calm. Did HR buy it? She laughed. No. We know you. And frankly, we've all seen the party photos. What party photos? The ones Patricia posted. Grayson's in none of them. People noticed. Word gets around. You're not the one looking unstable. I hung up the call and just sat there for a moment. It had begun. Not a scandal. Not a meltdown. But a reckoning. The kind that doesn't come with headlines, but with silence. The kind that empties rooms at networking events and drops email responses from hours to never. People in their world started stepping back, not loudly, but visibly. Because in circles like theirs, image isn't just everything, it's currency. And when someone like Grayson quietly signals that you're not worth being around, the world listens. I didn't gloat. I didn't text Harper. I didn't tell my wife, wherever she was, that I knew what they were going through. Instead, I lit a candle that evening, opened an old notebook I hadn't touched in months, and began to write again. Just thoughts. Reflections. Not about them. About me. Because something had shifted deep inside me since that night they told me not to come. Something I hadn't expected. I began to remember myself. Not the version I trimmed down to be palatable at dinner tables. Not the quiet shadow at family gatherings. Not the helpful hand that never got mentioned in toasts. But the man I used to be. The one who dreamed without needing permission. The one who gave because it was who he was, not because he was trying to earn a seat at someone else's table. That man had gone quiet for a long time. Now he was waking up. The truth wasn't just echoing out there, it was echoing in here, inside me. And as it did, I realized something else. I had always been the one with power. Not because I had money, not because I had influence, but because I showed up over and over, and they depended on that. They built their world on the assumption that I'd never stop giving. But when I stopped, the whole illusion wobbled. And now? Now they weren't just facing public whispers and dropped sponsors. They were facing themselves. That weekend, I ran into an old friend at the bookstore. Someone who used to be in Patricia's circle. She leaned in and said, I heard what happened. Just wanted you to know, people are starting to talk. But not in a bad way. I thanked her. We exchanged numbers again. And as I walked home through the crisp December air, something warmed in my chest. It wasn't pride. It was peace. Because sometimes, the storm doesn't need thunder. Sometimes, it's a quiet shift in wind. And everyone feels it, even if no one talks about it. It came on a Wednesday morning. An email with no subject line. Just my name in the first sentence like we were old friends catching up after a misunderstanding. We've been thinking, maybe we could meet for brunch this Sunday? No apology. No ownership. Just suggestion. As if the last few weeks hadn't happened. As if they hadn't thrown me out of their picture and now wanted to paste me back in because the new frame was falling apart. I scrolled down. They didn't even try to pretend it was about rebuilding a relationship. Halfway through the message, Harper wrote, It would also mean a lot if you could speak to Grayson. Maybe ask him to take down that post? It's hurting more than just our image. It's affecting people's jobs. Their image. Their jobs. Not a word about the years I'd carried them on my back. Not a line about the sacrifices I'd made. Just concern over the fallout. And that was the problem. They didn't want forgiveness. They wanted a reset. As if this was a video game they could restart once the screen glitched. As if I didn't remember every moment they dismissed me. Every time they handed me their coats and their complaints, while smiling at the people they really wanted to impress. I closed the email without responding. And a strange thing happened. I didn't feel rage. I didn't even feel insulted. I felt free. Because the version of me that would have rushed to keep the peace, that would have agreed to the brunch and played mediator again, that version was gone. Buried beneath the silence they forced on me. And in its place stood someone quieter, clearer, untouchable. That night, I got a call from an unknown number. I let it ring. But when it came again, same number, I answered. It was my father-in-law. The man who once told me, with a smirk and a drink in his hand, "You're not what I expected her to marry, but I guess stability has its perks." He cleared his throat before speaking, like he wasn't used to asking for things. "I think there's been enough drama," he said. "We're all adults here. Maybe it's time to move on." I didn't speak. He went on. "Patricia's having trouble sleeping. Harper's a wreck. Your wife's, well, she's confused. She misses you." I stared at the window, watching a few birds hop along the frost-covered ledge. "I think what we need," he said, "is to just clear the air. One conversation. Get everyone on the same page." I finally spoke. "Which page is that?" He paused. "You know what I mean." But I didn't. Not really. Because the page they were on was never the one I was allowed to write. I said, "Did you know Patricia called my workplace? Tried to get HR to flag me as emotionally unstable?" A beat of silence. Then, defensively, she was just worried. The media thing caught us off guard. You know how she gets when she panics. "Must be hard," I said, voice steady, "when the spotlight hits the wrong person." He didn't reply. I ended the call with a simple, "I'm not interested." Then I turned my phone off for the night. The next morning, they escalated. An email went out to the entire extended family. A message crafted like a PR campaign disguised as family concern. My name in it, carefully framed. "We're worried about him. He hasn't responded. We think he might be isolating. The holidays are hard. Let's keep him in our prayers." Prayers. From people who told me not to come. Who called me dead weight. Who only remembered I existed when someone they wanted was watching me. They wanted to control the narrative. Turn my silence into instability. My peace into a cry for help. It would have been laughable if it weren't so common. That's what people like them do when they lose their grip on someone who used to play along. They don't change. They reframe. But I wasn't angry. I was entertained. Because now they weren't just burning bridges. They were standing on them, striking matches, and wondering why the smoke was rising. A day later, my wife sent me a message directly. No emojis. No sugar. Just words. "I know we've made mistakes. But they're still my family. And I'm caught in the middle." That line. Caught in the middle. As if she hadn't stood beside them at the table. As if she hadn't laughed at their jokes while I stood in the kitchen, clearing plates. As if choosing to stay silent when I was being erased didn't place her on one side. I didn't reply. Because I wasn't caught in anything. I was walking out of it. By Friday, I got a ping from my HR system. Apparently, Patricia had followed up with another concerned citizen email. HR flagged it as potential harassment and asked if I wanted to escalate it formally. I declined. Not because I was afraid, but because I didn't need help protecting myself anymore. I'd already won. Because the more they flailed, the more they revealed. They couldn't understand how I stayed calm. How I didn't clap back online or throw their secrets into the wind. Because they were still trapped in the performance. And I had walked off the stage. That weekend, I took a train to visit Andre. We had lunch at a quiet diner. He told me about his startup idea, his mother's health, his dreams to build something that helped people, not just impress them. We didn't talk about Harper, or Patricia, or Grayson, because real life was happening, and I had stepped back into it. I watched him talk with light in his eyes, and I felt something shift in my chest. Not bitterness, but relief. Because while they were busy curating perfection, I had found something better, something real, and no brunch or email could ever match that. It was late afternoon when the knock came. Not rushed like someone in a panic. Not hesitant like a neighbor dropping by. Just steady, like the kind of knock that comes from people who believe they still have a right to be let in. I was in the middle of watering my small balcony garden. Nothing fancy, just some herbs, a couple of succulents. The kind of quiet company that grows without asking for applause. I like that about plants. They don't perform. They don't pretend. They thrive or they wither, and either way, they're honest. The knock came again. I wiped my hands on a towel, walked through the apartment, and paused at the door. 3 shadows stood behind the frosted glass. One tall, stiff posture, that had to be her father. The one fidgeting and checking her phone, Harper. And the shorter one in the middle, with a gift bag clutched in both hands, Patricia. Of course. I opened the door, but didn't step aside. They stared at me like I was a stranger who had stolen something from them. Patricia was the first to speak. "Hi," she said, offering that same brittle smile I'd seen 100 times at dinners when the conversation turned uncomfortable. "We didn't want to bother you. Just thought we could drop something off, and maybe talk." She lifted the bag slightly, like it was a peace treaty. It was wrapped in gold, the tissue paper puffed up like frosting. I didn't touch it. Behind her, Harper gave a tight nod. Her father cleared his throat, but said nothing. I looked at them. The same 3 who had treated me like wallpaper for years, who had edited me out of their gatherings with the precision of a social media crop tool, who now stood on my doorstep, eyes searching for the man they never bothered to truly see. "We just wanted to make things right," Patricia said. "Right." That word floated between us like perfume. Too sweet, too forced. "You've been ignoring our messages," Harper added. "We figured face-to-face might help." I didn't move, didn't smile, just let them fill the silence. Her father finally stepped forward. He had a card in his hand, one of those premium white ones with raised lettering. He held it like it meant something. "We came to apologize," he said. "You deserved better." It was rehearsed. I could tell. They had probably planned this the way they planned their holiday menus. Every word weighed, every sentence seasoned with just enough regret to sound real. Patricia held out the bag again. "We got you something small. Just a gesture." I glanced at it. A gesture. That's what I'd been to them. A gesture. A role. A quiet fixture in the background that made everything feel stable. Until I stopped. "Please," she whispered. "Can we come in?" She said it like it hurt to ask. I looked at them again. 3 people who once told me not to show up, who said they'd pretend they didn't know me, who had laughed while brushing me out of the picture, then panicked when the world noticed what they'd done. They hadn't come to apologize. They'd come to reset, to smooth it over, to stitch the narrative back together before anyone else noticed the tear. But I wasn't a loose thread. I was the fabric, and they'd never known it. "No," I said. Patricia blinked. Harper's lips parted like she wanted to protest, but nothing came out. Her father looked down at the card in his hand, then tucked it back into his coat pocket. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't explain. Didn't justify. Because when people choose to forget your worth, the worst thing you can do is remind them. They'll only remember long enough to use it again. So I kept my peace. Literally. I gently closed the door. Not a slam. Not a statement. Just a closing. A clear boundary. I stood behind it for a few seconds, listening. No footsteps. No yelling. Just silence. Eventually, the sound of heels on concrete. A car door shutting. Then another. And then they were gone. I turned back to my plants, watered the last one, and opened the window. Cool air swept in. Fresh. Honest. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel cruel. I felt clean. Because closure doesn't always come with big speeches or dramatic endings. Sometimes, it's just the quiet choice not to let people walk into your space with shoes still muddy from the last time they stepped all over you. Later that night, I opened the gift bag. Curiosity, not sentiment. Inside was a leather-bound notebook and a fountain pen. The card read, "For your thoughts. We hope you'll write again." I smiled. Not because it was thoughtful, but because they still didn't get it. I'd never stopped writing. I just stopped writing about them. I threw the card away. Kept the notebook. Because even if the gesture was hollow, the pages were still blank and mine to fill. And this time, I'd write only what mattered. No edits. No pretending. Just truth. It had been 2 weeks since they stood at my door with their gift bag and carefully chosen words. 2 weeks since I told them no. Since I chose not to open the door to the same people who once asked me not to show up at all. And in that time, not much changed on the surface. My apartment was still small. My routines remained the same. I woke up early, brewed my coffee, went to work. I watered my plants, read books. Sometimes I watched old films I'd forgotten I loved. But something inside me had shifted, something permanent. Not anger, not revenge. Just weight. Lifted. There's a certain kind of peace that comes when you stop fighting to be seen by people who've already made up their minds about you. It's not dramatic. It doesn't roar. It just settles. Like quiet snowfall in a forest where no one's watching. I had spent years trying to prove myself to people who were too busy performing their version of perfection to notice the man who swept the stage after they left. And I wasn't blameless. I allowed it, smiled through it, convinced myself that being needed was close enough to being loved, that being useful was enough. But usefulness wears out. Love doesn't. And the difference becomes clearer the day they stop needing you and forget you were ever there. That's the thing about being the invisible backbone. They only feel you when you walk away. I walked into my study and sat at the desk. On the wall above, it was a framed photo, me and Andre on his graduation day. He wore a borrowed cap, grinning like he had just conquered the world. I was in the background, slightly blurred, holding a small bouquet I had picked up on the way. No one asked who bought the flowers. No one tagged me in the photo. But I didn't mind, because I knew the story. And now, so did someone else. Grayson had never reached out again after that voicemail. He didn't need to. That single message had done more for my soul than a decade of forced acceptance from people who couldn't even remember who made the rice at Christmas. He saw me, and not for what I had, or what I gave, or who I stood beside in family photos, but for who I was, the man in the corner, the steady hand, the one who did good without needing to be applauded for it. And somehow, that mattered more than all the dinner parties and performative apologies combined. I pulled out the notebook Patricia had left behind and opened it. The leather was soft, too expensive, trying too hard to impress. But the pages were blank. And blank pages don't lie. I began to write. Not about them. Not about what they did. That chapter was done. I wrote about who I was becoming. A man who could say no without guilt. A man who could look in the mirror without needing someone else's reflection beside him to feel whole. A man who didn't need to prove his worth anymore, because it wasn't up for debate. By noon, the sun peeked through the clouds and spilled across the hardwood floor. I made tea, sat quietly with it. The stillness felt earned now. Not like loneliness, like peace. My phone buzzed once. A message from Andre. Guess who just got approved for his grant? I smiled. Proud of you. Couldn't have done it without you, Mr. R. You believed in me before I did. I didn't reply to that one, because sometimes the best replies are the ones you carry in your chest, not your phone. Later that day, I went for a walk through the park. The trees were bare, but the air was fresh. The kind of cold that wakes you up rather than weighs you down. I passed a bench I used to sit on during my lunch breaks, back when I worked across town. I remembered how I'd eat quietly, text my wife to ask what she wanted for dinner, and head home in time to make something before Patricia dropped by with complaints and condescension. Those days were gone, and I wasn't mourning them. In fact, I pitied them, because they had everything polished on the outside. Pearls, brand deals, curated smiles, but none of them knew what it felt like to be at peace without performance. They needed an audience. I had myself. That was enough. As I walked past a family building a snowman, I felt a wave of warmth. Not jealousy, not sadness. Just appreciation. For the simplicity of it. For the honesty. They weren't posing for likes. They weren't styling the snowman for a photo shoot. They were just living. Present. Laughing. Cold fingers and warm hearts. That used to be me. Before I got swept up in trying to fit into someone else's idea of value. Before I thought love had to be earned in silence. Now I knew better. I walked home slowly. There were still emails I hadn't answered. Still calls I had ignored. But there was no urgency anymore. Because I wasn't waiting for them to see me. They had their chance. They looked past me and paid the price for it. Now they were left with the echo of what they once had and the silence of a door that no longer opened for them. And me? I didn't ruin their Christmas. They did that themselves. I simply chose not to fix it. For once. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do isn't raise your voice, or argue your worth, or demand an apology. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is not show up.